Welcome to the Second Reading Podcast from the University of Texas at Austin.
The Republicans were in the Democratic Party because there was only one party.
So I tell people on a regular basis, there is still a land of opportunity in America. It's called Texas.
The problem is, these departures from the Constitution, they have become the norm.
At what point must a female senator raise her hand or her voice to be recognized over the male colleagues in the room?
And welcome back to the Second Reading Podcast for the week of June 22nd, 2021. I'm Jim Henson, director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm happy to be joined on the podcast today by State Representative Travis Clardy, coming to us by phone. Representative Clardy represents District 11 in the Texas House, which includes Cherokee, Nacogdoches, and Rusk counties in East Texas. He's currently serving his fifth term in the Texas House, where during this session, he served on the Culture, Recreation, and Tourism Committee, and also, as we will discuss, on the Elections Committee, which was the center of a lot of action. Representative Clardy, thanks for taking time to be here today. Had a chance to recover a little bit from such a busy session?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, I want to start with the most current events. So late last week, Governor Abbott vetoed Article 10 of the state budget for the next 2 years, which is the part of the budget for legislative branch entities. Now, this was a follow-through on a threat to do so that he first issued publicly in a tweet on Memorial Day after Democrats broke quorum in order to kill the big voting bill, SB 7. I want to talk to you about what you make of the big picture here, but first off, can you tell us what this veto means in practical terms from your perspective in the legislature? What's next?
Practically, we're still trying to figure out exactly what it means. This was, to my knowledge, an unprecedented move by the governor to do this. I think there's always been some question of exactly what the land veto is of the executive branch, and to my knowledge, it's been done to curtail or unfund one of the co-equal branches of government, whether the judiciary or the legislative, but that's what we've got. So we're all trying to kind of parse through this. I really expected this to be more of a sign of frustration when the governor first mentioned it, which I understood, that he had set election reform as one of his priorities, and so I could understand the initial reaction, but I really didn't think that he would follow through. Well, but here we are.
Yeah, I think you're not alone in that, and it would be unfair to ask you to get in the governor's head. But what do you think he's trying to accomplish here? Is this a signal just to the Democrats? Is it a signal to the legislature as a whole? I don't know if you've talked to your colleagues much about this. How are people interpreting this?
Well, I've talked a little bit. More of them before he actually signed his line item veto on Article 10. But beforehand, I think the general consensus, both from Republicans and Democrats, was that a signal of his frustration that he wouldn't actually do it. Because, again, I'm having a very difficult political standpoint or from a policy point of how this is supposed to help things for us to come back and have what I really hope to have and certainly hope to have before his veto. And that is a productive special session where we address some real needs for Texas and let's deal with some significant issues which we weren't able to complete during the regular session. So I don't see where this helps that at all. I think it causes a lot more open questions, and frankly, it seems like we've been spending a lot more time spinning our wheels of, how do we deal with this issue in a special, what's going to be on the call, and how do we work around this and take care of the folks that, honestly, Jim, the staffers that take care of us. I can get by without the $600 a month that we get as a state representative, and although it's been to me that that's a constitutional provision, that's not part of what's being cut. People are being hurt, and particularly for those staffers, for Republican members like myself, who had no role or desire or took any actions which led to the quorum being broken by the Democrats. It seems like we're trying to kill a flea with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, and it winds up paralyzing a lot of the other bodies, related to that do the bureaucratic work of the legislature and that are doing things that are important to moving forward on the things that are still unresolved, it seems to me, right?
Yeah. And honestly, Jim, you use the term bureaucratic. I would that does carry with it some negative connotations for a whole bunch of people. But what it does do affect other people who really do important work for the state of Texas, support staff for the legislative branch, whether that be the Legislative Budget Board or Ledge Council or other organizations that really provide that fabric, that level of resource that we need to do our jobs effectively. Those people are being impacted by this, and they serve Texas. This is their livelihood. They all have bills to pay and mouths to feed, just like the rest of us. So I don't really understand why this was done. I guess I can see where it could perhaps apply some pressure to see that the session finishes productively. But again, if this is all about what happened on the second to last night of the session in the Texas House, when the majority of the Democrats walked out, broke quorum for the last couple of hours, I really think that's an issue best handled by the House. I think that Speaker Phelan and those of us who actively work on and want to see a quality elections bill pass and other measures that the governor sees fit to put on the call, we can handle our internal House discipline fine on our own, thank you. I don't think we need a heavy hand from the executive and his force to apply pressure to accomplish the goals that we have in front of us. I think we can do it very well on our own time, in our own way, under our own rules. We do like, and I think all Texans like our branches, our three co-equal branches of government, of being independent and acting on their own. And, if we've got a problem in our house, well, it's our responsibility to fix it. And I think that we can. So, but I don't know what this portends for the coming special, whenever that may be. I don't know what effect this has on the Democrats and their willingness to participate and to come back for the special session. They broke quorum for a couple of hours during the regular. But does this motivate them to stay away completely, do what happened back in 2003 and leave the state and get outside the jurisdiction of Texas and not allow us to make a quorum? I would hope not. But to me, this action makes that more likely than less likely. I was not concerned at all about the Democrats, not coming back for a special session. I think that they made their point. They wanted an opportunity to see the bills, study the bills. We certainly were going to do that. We were certainly going to address any concerns that were there with then SB 7, but what will be the elections bill that we came forward with. Now I don't know how this really affects decisions that our colleagues may make. There's already discussion of, and from more than one angle, of people challenging the governor's veto on a separation of powers principle, which, frankly, I think is a legitimate issue to be looked at. Like I said, I'm so surprised we're even have this conversation, and that we're going to be maybe looking to the courts to resolve an issue when really all we need to do is set a date and come back to work.
And in a way, timing becomes really important here. Once again, we're up against something of a deadline, even for court action, given that the fiscal year that this budget applies to starts relatively soon. And so this is going to have to be ironed out if it's not going to impair the work of the legislature in the fall, knowing that that you have to come back for an October special session for redistricting, right?
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that Jim, I did say I wasn't overly chagrined. Yes, I would have liked to have had the opportunity to pass SB 7, have it to a vote on the floor before the end of the regular session. We had learned that there were a couple of issues that needed to be addressed, which we could have fixed with technical changes, which wasn't really an opportunity to amend a Conference Committee report on the floor, but could have been addressed as technical corrections after the bill's filed. But, we didn't get that opportunity. But at the same time, I also was well aware that we would be coming back sometime before the budget cycle started, September 1 of 2021, because of the federal monies that we anticipate coming in, we'll deal with in the supplemental appropriations. So we were going to have that session. And then we also knew, we've all been acutely aware, that because the U.S. Census Bureau hasn't provided the apportionment figures, the detailed statistical information to draw the lines in redistricting, that we were also going to be coming back in, that September, October. So we knew we were coming back at least twice on two significant issues. So, yeah, well, when we got back, we could fix this and any other issues, like I said, that the governor has the exclusive prerogative of placing on the call. But this veto of Article 10 just seems to add a complication or a wrinkle that I'm not seeing how it is productive or helpful and potentially could be harmful in having the kind of working relationship that's really integral to the legislative process working.
You raised the point that it complicates an already complicated situation, but the linchpin at this point doesn't, with or without the veto, seem to be movement on SB 7. And I was interested to hear you say that, you thought that some of the problems might have been fixable through the amendment process on the floor in the final moments or in the final hours. Of course, you didn't get that opportunity, but that does raise the question of, what would be a bill that both Republicans on the whole would find acceptable and Democrats, I think acceptable would be too strong a word, but the Democrats would not find so offensive that they would resort to sort of the kind of escalation that we saw in the last session. You became kind of a star on NPR in the interview in which you chalked up two of the more controversial elements of the bill to mistakes and muddled work on the conference committee. And that would be the limiting voting hours on Sunday to after 1 p.m. and judges being able to overturn election evidence results based on, and quoting from the bill, the preponderance of evidence. It seems to me you've been pretty clear that those two things, just setting aside whether, the degree to which this is a mistake or, just what happened, although I'm curious about that. How confident are you really that you could get to something that both sides would find at least digestible, if not great, assuming there's not going to be a consensus? Yeah. What has to be in there?
Yeah, I'm confident that we can get to a bill and will get to a bill that will go to the floor and that there will be a record vote on, and I'm confident that the bill will pass. I'm also very confident that it will be a bill that will largely pass, if not entirely pass, on a partisan line vote. And it's not because of the specifics that were in the SB 7, I will say, as envisioned by myself and my fellow conferees. We tried to craft it, filed timely, and put before the body in the conference committee report. We put a lot of time and effort into it, but I think that what we're really battling against and getting a bipartisan support of the bill is the fact that SB 7 at that time, and hopefully we can escalate some of those tensions by further review and explanation, and having all of our colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, have the opportunity to review it well in advance of being put to a vote. But SB 7 had taken on kind of mythic proportions. That it has the perception, I think, was very, very different from the reality of what we wanted to put forward and to put forward, and which was largely in place in the conference committee. You mentioned that there were a couple of things that we had issues with. There was no desire then nor now, and the proof will be in the pudding, to limit the hours. In fact, we wanted to expand the hours for Sunday voting for the proverbial souls to the polls. It has always started at 11. That's where I wanted to leave it. That's where we all wanted to leave it. But it came back to 1. I really am at a loss to explain some of those things. Likewise, we've always had laws in Texas to deal with election contests. Those have been on the books forever. It's been used very infrequently, and the standard's always been clear and convincing evidence. That was one of the things that I fully expected to stay in the bill, but there was some movement in the final version. That's where I think some of the bills that have been filed around the country, and I think the original file, SB 7, that was filed in the Senate by Senator Hughes, there were some, in my view, some problematic areas that would have caused problems in the context of a judicial review. They weren't really going, they may have been well-intentioned, but they weren't really going to cause problems in the real world. Rubber meets the road, boots on the ground, running elections in the state of Texas. And so we worked hard to develop a bill that, like most legislation, starts off with some ideas and concepts and over the process some of the rough edges are filed off to make it more appropriate, more useful, more palatable, and try to build a broader consensus. That's the way we have governed in Texas, is not to try to file a bunch of bills that we can do it and let's just power through because we have the numbers to do it and shove it down people's throats. Elections should be, and the laws that affect elections should be nonpartisan, bipartisan, and that's really was certainly my intention and will be when we come back to the special.
I'm not trying to relitigate the account, but what I think would be helpful to listeners, and particularly some of the students that I know are listening to this because we make them, would be to hear a little something about the process. And I'm not saying name names, but describe what goes on behind the scenes. Like, who is hands-on responsible for what goes in a bill in this kind of a tense last-minute situation where you're putting together large pieces of legislation with a lot of interested parties and with the clock ticking very loudly. In other words, how does it happen that the bill comes out and and people are still kind of going, oh, hey, where did that come from?
Well, it's kind of funny. It's not too dissimilar from the old School of Rock cartoon of, I'm just a bill. It's really that process. And, I was very honored and pleased and thoroughly enjoyed my experience of serving on the Elections Committee in the House. And so the committees are formed. Most people are on there. It's where they want it to be. That's a passion at each of the members, wherever they may be from the state, regardless of party affiliation. And so people have different ideas of bills. And in this instance, our chairman, we knew this was on the emergency items or key areas that Governor Abbott wanted to see approached. And I think all of us knew that after the events of last November and the things that followed, elections were going to be a very hot issue and closely looked at. And there were expectations that there were things that need to be done to continue to protect the integrity of Texas elections. So with that as a backdrop, what you do is people get to come forward, and we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people come forward and provide their testimony and input of what they think the bill should be. And some may be stakeholders that are involved in the process, whether it be the Secretary of State's office or Office of Attorney General for voter integrity and election integrity. It may have been from county clerks or elections administrators from around the state, but also just regular Texans that have opinions. And so all of that input does matter. I mean, that's the good news, is that we do listen, we do hear what we're saying, and we listen to our own constituents, and I will listen to my own elections administrators and what's good, bad, or indifferent, and then we try to identify places where the law can be strengthened, and if there's outright, glaring omissions or problems. From my point of view, we have a strong body of election laws in Texas, but there's always room for improvement. One of the issues, more into my experience, but after I heard a lot of the testimony, it's just, again, to me, it strikes me the wrong way that we actually contemplate and have allowed to spring up a cottage industry of voter harvesting in the state. That people get paid to go chase down ballots that have been requested by mail and make sure that those ballots get returned, and the level of influence or quote assistance that is provided to the people who may or may not have requested these ballots by mail. It's an area where we all know, and I've known since I first got elected, that it's the place in our election code probably the most rife for mischief that things can happen. And we know this has happened in real elections in real time. But, there is not some rampant epidemic of voter fraud. It does happen. There are cases pending that are being prosecuted. Interestingly enough, a lot of that and a lot of the problems we've seen has not always happened. In fact, more often than not, it does not happen in the November general election contest of Republican versus Democrat. It happens in primaries, and it happens in nonpartisan election races or political subdivisions races. So election has more to do. Election law has more to do and to be concerned with than just the presidential election every 4 years. And I think that's something that I think people do lose sight of. Sometimes it's hard to do this, but in Texas, I think we do a good job in state government. I think we do a good job of being responsive to the citizens of Texas. But sometimes the issues that are more important get lost in translation because the national narrative, which drives much of the discussion and perception, like I said, it's on this kind of mythical portion, and then it is imputed to what goes on in Texas.
So
I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a process. How do we get there?
Well, I
think
get the
we get together, we meet, and we listen to people and craft a list.
Well, I get that there's a lot of surface to the issue, and that and that argument. I guess what I was wondering more specifically in this case also, though, was in the final moments of assembling this bill, is it the conference committee members emailing drafts to each other? Is it in that final analysis where there were, the final provisions that were put in there, some of which weren't in either of the other bills, as I understand it? Is that interactions happening among the conference committee members? Is it mostly the chairs?
No, it's among the conference committee members, and it is done largely in person. But you have to have. It's important to have. The old adage, too many cooks spoil the broth.
Yeah.
Don't forget, if it was just left to the House, if it had been just left to the House conferees to draft this up, get to a final version, and get it filed, I don't think we would have had as much difficulty. But the way our system works, it's a bicameral legislature, and which is entirely appropriate. The Senate had a different approach and some different priorities, and so that is the nature of why we go to conference. Right. We don't like all of your amendments. They don't like all of our amendments, so we go and meet and try to do that. It's better done face to face. But, and one of the challenges of SB 7 coming down the stretch before we got to the conference committee report is this was as they say, an omnibus bill. It had taken on a bunch of additional pieces and parts from other legislation to make it a comprehensive election bill. Things were added, and there were a number of things added. A lot of them intended just to, when you take this significant portion with this over here, there's some bridge language, some harmonization of those within the election code framework. So, but I will tell you, the folks we work with, our staff in the elections committee, working with Greg Abbott, and because these are important legal issues, and there is some likelihood of it having that the bill, if and when passed, would be subject to federal court scrutiny. That this isn't one of these. This is not naming a memorial highway.
Right.
This is going to be looked at with a high level scrutiny, as it should be. Again, there's nothing I think more important to the fabric of our nation and to our state than open, free, and fair elections, and so they should be scrutinized. But with that anticipation, first rule of a lot of things in life is don't be stupid, and so. Let's take a look at what we're crafting here, and does this make sense? And so, we would, and obviously, Jim, there's some things that I can't go into without running afoul or running the risk of waiving privileges with counsel.
Sure.
But which we enjoy with the legislative council, which help us with the drafting, but also with our parliamentarians, and also with outside counsel, people who are experts in the field of election law. That we try to avail ourselves of all those resources, but like anything else, the more people you involve, the more complicated it gets, and then when you're up against some time constraints, which we obviously were, complicated, and a few things don't quite flange up as neatly and nicely as we would have liked them to. So I'm not as frustrated maybe as some of my colleagues coming back to special session. I'm actually looking forward to it because I feel very strongly we did work together and put together, I think, a very good constructive piece of legislation with the intention of keeping Texas elections fair. I have high confidence in the results of the last election in November of 2020. I think the proof was in the pudding here, and I think our intentions of what we want to do with the election reform bill that we passed a special, the proof will be in that pudding.
So we've talked a lot about things that, were I don't want to say you were enthusiastic on the election stuff, but you mentioned that, another reason you were okay to some degree with going back to a session, and maybe not to put particular words in your mouth, but a little frustrated with the added factor of the veto of the legislative article, is that you thought there were other things that were still left to be done. What else would you like to work on since you're going to come back?
Well, I will tell you, of course, I think it's appropriate. The legislature does control the purse strings. I've seen 16, I've seen 18 billion, but I think 18 is the right number of federal dollars, some of the last COVID relief that is coming into Texas, and that's a significant amount of money. I don't care who you are, but in light of the relative to the Texas budget, and decisions need to be made there. So that obviously needs to be on the call. Another issue, Jim, that I want on the call, I'll be working on letters tomorrow when I get back to Austin and back into Texas, is to let's take a harder look at our energy reliability. I think the event a week or so ago, and the advisories who went on energy usage, it causes me great concern because, yes, it was a little warm in June, but I think it is foreseeable and not a news flash to say it's going to be hotter in July and August in Texas. And I don't have the confidence that I would like to have that we are ready to withstand another challenge to our electrical grid and system in Texas. And so I'm going to be crafting letters and sending this to the governor and the speaker and PUC and ERCOT. And I think there's some easy things that we could do on the short term to be ready so we're not faced with brownouts or blackouts. I would find that inexcusable. Now, did we do good work in this past session? My classmate, Patty, led the charge in the House to pass some good legislation. But to my view, it was primarily focused on winterization and more accountability for ERCOT and PUC and changing their fundamental structure, all of which I supported and were good measures. But I really don't think we have grappled in a way, and this little shot across the bow we've got in June tells me that we better have, and I think the people of Texas would expect us to have, a real plan for what happens if we have exceptionally hot temperature for a long period of time this summer. How do we make sure that the hospital's power is on, and our assisted living and nursing homes continue to have power, and that people aren't subjected to excessive heat for long periods of time, because this is a truly life-threatening possibility. And again, the notion that it's going to be hot in July and August is not just foreseeable, that's a virtual certainty. So now's the time. We've got time to do it, and I would hope that's going to be on the call.
So what do you think? What do you think gets that done? Briefly, in other words, what didn't get done that you would suggest needs to be laid out more specifically? Specifically,
I think there's some rules that could be relaxed as to what generating units can produce at what levels. We do have a deregulated market for electrical generation in Texas. I think, though, that we do need to have some additional emergency powers to act to make sure that those units stay online. And I think that the simplest, fastest way to do this, and again, this is in an extreme emergency situation. I know we have been making a really concerted effort in Texas to move away from our reliance, as I say, 20 years ago, coal-based energy. And I think that's been an appropriate thing to do. And we now have, I think, by all accounts, the most diversified sources of energy of any state in the union, both thermal and non-thermal. But we have seen a problem with the reliability of some of the non-thermal power. And so we need to, in an emergency basis, I would propose, unless I'm going to suggest in my letter, that we look at taking some of the coal fleet that we have taken offline and incentivize those companies that own them, that they're there, they're present. It's the most reliable short-term fix that we can do in the next month to 6 weeks. To have 5,000 megawatts standing by, ready to go, not to be turned on just for the fun of it, but only in those dire circumstances where the grid is threatened, or we're looking at a loss of power, in sectors of the state. So again, no one is suggesting that any kind of return to coal is the optimal future of power in Texas, but it's kind of like SB7, Jim. We got up against the clock, and we didn't have the time to fix the things that we would like to have been able to fix. Well, I don't want to get back up against the clock again like we did this winter. And we have time to put together some reliable backup plans in place that would let us literally weather the summer, weather the storm, and then we can come back and look at later. But I think there's going to be a greater resistance and a greater pushback when people go to their light switch or try to turn on their ceiling fan or try to get their air conditioner to run for a few hours and nothing happens.
Well, I think that it's very much on the public's minds, and to be frank, I think our polling showed that the public is still a little skeptical that enough has been done to ensure the reliability of the grid. So, whether those specifics are what people are asking for. It's a complicated issue. I think there is an audience for more action by the legislature that would help with the reliability of the grid.
Well, suffice it to say, I share that skepticism, and particularly for the coming 2 or 3 months. It's like, okay, let's get through summer, let's get to the fall, and let's look at some long-term solutions. But I just don't think we can really address, to my knowledge, in the last several summers, we have come pretty close to times we've actually exceeded the quote capacity available. I'm reading numbers over it. We've got 15% or 16% reserve capacity for the summer. But these are the same people that told us we had more than adequate capacity during Winter Storm Uri. So pardon my skepticism, and I hope they're right. But I think we better have a plan. So your question was, what do I want to focus on in special? I think that needs to be it. I just hope we get the special soon enough that we can not be in the middle of it when the problem arises, which is the reason I'll be sending my letters off to the powers that be, and hopefully they find a receptive ear somewhere.
And you have not, you said earlier, just to come, you've not heard anything reliable on the timing of the session of the next special.
No, I think we all know it's going to happen before September 1 because, like you said, that's the budget cycle. I don't think it's going to happen until the 4th. I don't think that will happen. I'm not in the know. Everybody asks me the same questions like I'm going to know anything better than, John Q. Public or anybody else in Texas. But I really think what we'll do is see sometime into July, picking a date, I'd say probably July 26th. That way we could finish, have a few days extra if we need to wrap something up before September 1. But and again, then if there's things that we don't address outside of the budget issues, which I hope will include a correction to this, Title IX or Article 9 veto of the legislative branch. If we get that done, we have a few other things still left on the table. I would hope we get the election bill done in this first special. But honestly, Jim, we could do that in October in addition to redistricting, and that would be fine. We've got an election in November, but it's not it's constitution amendments, and then the primaries will be next spring. So we've got time to do that in either session. So I just want us to make the best use of the time that's available, and I hope we can do it without any real distraction that I think that legislative budget veto fear may have caused.
Well, I got to say, you're one of the few people I've talked to that is enthusiastic for a special session. So hats off to you on that.
Well,
thank you very much for taking time to be here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. I do try to be ever the optimist, although sometimes my patience does get strained, but I do thoroughly enjoy serving the Texas Legislature, representing the House District 11, and look forward to getting back to see you. Hopefully get to see you while I'm there.
Well, I hope to see you when you're back on the ground here, sir. Thanks again for doing this. Enjoy the rest of your day. I also want to thank our technical crew in the Liberal Arts Development Studio and the College of Liberal Arts at UT Austin. Thanks for listening. Thanks again to Representative Clardy for taking time. And we'll be back next week with another Second Reading podcast. The Second Reading podcast is a production of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin.